Now I will turn to introducing Dr. Jacqueline Persons, who is our keynote speaker for today. She is the director of the Oakland Cognitive Behavior Therapy Center and clinical professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. She is internationally recognized for her writings and presentations on the topics of case conceptualization and evidence-based practice. She has published nearly 100 articles and chapters and 3 books. Dr. Persons is a past president of the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies and the Society for Science of Clinical Psychology. She received her Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the University of Pennsylvania in 1979. So without further ado, I'd like to give our warm welcome to and aloha to Dr. Persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nakamura. I am honored to be here. I think what you all are accomplishing in the state of Hawaii to promote evidence-based practice is quite remarkable, and I'm happy to contribute any way I can to it. My talk today is titled Using Case Formulation, Progress Monitoring, and Hypothesis Testing to Get Better CBT Outcomes. I am presenting to you a disclosure of my financial interest in the topic here today that won't surprise you. And my plan for today has 2 parts. The first part is a case presentation, and the second part is some didactic slides about the case formulation approach to CBT. At various points, especially at the end, but elsewhere as well, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Number 1 is, what are your take-home messages? That is, what are you learning that is worth remembering that you want to take home with you? And the other question is, what are your action items? Do you have any items for your to-do list that you want to do after you leave this presentation? And I'm going to ask you these questions for a couple of different reasons. One is, based on my own experience, and I think others' experience as well, like, have you ever had the experience that you go to a training and it's very exciting and interesting and you learn a lot of really cool things and you're all excited about it, and then you leave the training and you go back to your office and your behavior does not change. You slide into your usual mode of working. This has happened to me many times, and there's literature actually on the evidence base of, do people learn things in training workshops that leads to changes in their clinical practice? And the answer is, for the most part, they do not. So my goal here today is to push against that, and to, there's a little bit of data showing that if you reflect on your learning afterwards, you have a chance of integrating some of the new learning into your practice. So I'm going to ask you to reflect on what are you learning and any take-home action items in order to help you or to increase the chances of integrating into your work anything that you learn here, to help you consolidate your learning. And the other reason I'm going to ask you for that is because what you tell me about this, which I'll ask you to put it in the chat, is very useful feedback for me. Because I have certain ideas that I think I'm teaching you, but it's helpful for me to know, what are you actually learning that is actually helpful to you? So let me start with my patient, who is a case I wrote up. It was published in this paper a number of years ago. And it's a case of a treatment that I carried out that initially failed. I'm using a case formulation model to guide my work and my thinking about this case. So what does it mean to use a case formulation approach to cognitive behavior therapy? Let me say that the case I'm going to present is a case of an adult, and I know that you all are treating children and adolescents. I don't know too much about children and adolescents. I'm hoping that the general concepts and strategies that I'm teaching you today are going to be useful to you in your work with children and adolescents, and I look forward to hearing from you as to whether that is indeed the case. So let me just briefly state, what do I mean by a case formulation approach to cognitive behavior therapy? What I mean is a model like this, starting with, over on the left, assessment, using your assessment data to develop a formulation or a conceptualization of the case. And later I'm going to talk to you in more detail exactly what do I mean by a conceptualization of the case. One of the key ways a conceptualization of the case helps you is that it helps you figure out what is your intervention plan. In particular, what are the targets of treatment? I'll show you my example in a moment and to say more about this. So then you're going to use your formulation to develop a plan for intervening. And then what you're going to do is you're going to follow that big blue arrow back around to the beginning, and you're going to be doing ongoing assessment to monitor progress. So that's the overall model, and I'll be talking more about it, of course, as I go along. Here, oh, and look at this this is a cartoon that has in it the model. So you can see the doc is there in the room. He's saying, next, an example of the very same procedure when done correctly. We can hope that our procedures are not life and death procedures. Nevertheless, you can see it's an empirical approach, and you can see the trainees are up at the top, the students watching, which to me is interesting because I'm going to present a failing case. And failing cases are not good because the treatment fails. The good news about failing cases, you can learn from them. So we're talking about learning, and doing hypothesis testing is built into the model. So here's my patient. And my patient has given me permission to present this material and to write it up, actually. And I modified a couple details of his case, although not very many. Mid-40s, married white male, business executive, recently had a tiny bladder cancer removed about which his doctor was quite unconcerned. And then the patient is coming into treatment because what he's doing is constantly noting spots and things on his body that are causing him to think, oh, maybe it's cancer. And he's doing a lot of different checking behaviors. He's asking for reassurance from his wife. Oh, does this spot look the same as it did last week? My diagnostic assessment, he met criteria for hypochondriasis, which is what it was called at the time. Now it's called illness anxiety disorder. So that was my initial diagnosis. And then what I did was to develop a formulation and an intervention plan. And to formulate the case, I basically took this behavioral conceptualization, I guess we could call it a cognitive behavioral conceptualization of OCD, which says that there's triggers that activate the obsessions, which lead to the urges to ritualize. Then the patient does rituals or checking behaviors, which give him relief, and the relief reinforces the rituals, and the relief also reinforces the belief that the obsessions are important to pay attention to. And so I've got this evidence-based cognitive behavioral conceptualization of OCD, which then leads directly to the treatment plan, the behavioral treatment for OCD, again, an evidence-based treatment, which involves in vivo and imaginal exposure. It's exposure and response prevention. And he and I did in vivo exposure. Oh, we read articles about cancer. Is that in vivo? I guess it's in vivo exposure because he was afraid of thinking about cancer or learning anything about it. If he saw a newspaper article about cancer, he would immediately avoid it. We also did imaginal exposures to dying of cancer, and we worked hard to identify and drop out all of the reassurance seeking and avoidance and safety behaviors. And here's a list my patient made of his avoidance and safety behaviors. So this is our treatment. Oh, and here's our exposure hierarchy. Saying aloud, I was diagnosed with bladder cancer and the cancer was surgically removed. That was the item 10. 100 on the fear scale was reading about bladder cancer and imagine dying of cancer. That does sound scary, doesn't it? Even for us, but for him it was quite terrifying. So we did these exposures. The red arrow is where I'm going next because I'm monitoring progress. And here's my plot, which I copied from the journal article. The first thing I would say about, well, I'd say a couple things about this. One is the way I monitored this patient's progress was I asked him to give me a verbal report at the beginning of every session. How many bouts of health anxiety fear, how many bouts of fear of dying of cancer did you have last week? Because he would typically get these highly charged fear bouts. And so every week he's reporting this number. And maybe at first it sort of looks like maybe I'm helping him, but it becomes pretty clear that he's not getting better. I mean, we could see at week 30 or so, he's got this huge spike, and at week 18, he's having this huge spike. So about probably week 30, I start talking with him. Wait a minute, we are not getting the job done. We need to rethink what we're doing. And one thing I would say also is that I feel embarrassed that it took me 30 weeks to figure out that we need to rework the treatment plan, because 30 weeks is a really long time. Jeez, pardon me. Anyway, so I'll just say that. It's not up to my standards, but what can you do? Okay, so fortunately, my patient and I had a great working relationship. We started having these discussions, and I would say that the strategy I'm using, so I'm still holding on to my model. Now what I'm doing is more assessment to see if I can develop a new conceptualization that will lead to a new intervention plan that has a chance of being more helpful to this patient. So my patient was very helpful, and he and I just started talking about it. And as we're embarked on this process, which probably took us several weeks, he came in and described a situation that had happened at work that really got my attention, and I did a thought record. And here was the situation. He's at work, and he must have had some head cold or some kind of illness. His colleague said to him, "Oh, you're sick again," suggesting that my patient was repeatedly ill, which I don't remember if that was the case. But anyway, that was the situation. My patient had a huge burst of fear. I guess I didn't put that on the thought record. And then I asked him, what are those automatic thoughts? And you could see those downward arrows. And I'm guessing many of you are familiar perhaps with Dr. Burns's downward arrow strategy. So my patient's first thought was, it could be cancer. So then I asked him, okay, so imagine it is cancer. Why would that, I mean, of course that would be upsetting, but explain to me, what would be the most upsetting thing about that to you? Do you see what he said to me? He said, I'll miss work. Okay, tell me about that. Imagine you're ill. It turns out you have cancer. The worst thing about cancer is you're going to miss work, and that's bad because what? I'll drop a ball, by which he means I'll make a mistake. You know, something will get by me and I'll make a mistake. Okay, so imagine you drop a ball, you make a mistake. What is the worst thing about that? His answer was, I'll lose my job. He literally felt, and my patient was a very high level executive at a company where he had worked for 15 years. The idea that if he makes a mistake, he's going to lose his job, I'm not thinking so, but he's thinking so. He's terribly afraid. He's on the brink of losing his job. And then I asked him, what would be the worst thing about losing your job? The answer to that is, I would be humiliated. Okay, so now if this was your patient, I had you in the room, I would ask you, what do you think is going on? No, what do you think is going on here? To me, this was illuminating, because what I learned was the patient's greatest fear actually was of humiliation. It wasn't of dying of cancer. So then the other thing I learned from this patient was, and what I did was I stepped back and I looked not just at the presenting problem, but I looked at the whole case. Well, maybe I'll start with this fear of humiliation. I started with the fear of humiliation, and then I started looking around. I did a diagnostic assessment, and it became clear the patient met criteria for social anxiety disorder, right? Because notice the fear of humiliation is the core fear of social anxiety disorder. Does he have social anxiety? Yes, he does. Was I paying attention to this before? No, I wasn't. Okay, now I got that. And the other thing I did is I made a comprehensive problem list, and I looked not just at the thing that the patient was asking me for help with, but his whole situation. So you can see the health anxiety, the hypochondriasis over on the right. So he definitely had the hypochondriasis. He also had several other problems. He had a lot of public speaking anxiety. He had a very driven quality to his work, as you can imagine, because he was very afraid that nothing would get by him. He would not make a mistake. He was excessively focused on his son's sports. He had a son who was maybe 8 or 10. My patient coached the team, and my patient had a need to win, right? The team must win. Why? Because otherwise he'll be a bad coach, and now it would be humiliating. He also had conflicts with his wife about money. Like if a magazine appeared that he didn't know about, he's worried she spent money on something even small. Why would this be upsetting? Because he's worried he's going to lose his job. So then he's like saving money so that he's prepared if he has a catastrophic loss of his job. So then what I'm doing is I'm stepping back now. I'm looking at the entire case. The patient is helping me. We're sorting this all out together. And now I'm developing, this is a new conceptualization. And the core fears and the beliefs that are the maintaining beliefs that maintain and cause all of his symptoms are beliefs about fear of making mistakes, fear of achieving at a superior level. If I do not do these things, it means I'm a loser. People are going to lose respect for me and I will be humiliated. And he was driven by this need to be perfect, fear of making mistakes, fear of being humiliated. And that fear was tied to the hypochondriasis also. So now I have this case formulation, and what the patient, and then I said to the patient, okay, so I'm thinking we need to work on this fear of making mistakes and this fear of humiliation. What do you think? Where do you want to work? What he said he wanted to do was he wanted to work on his public speaking anxiety because it was causing him quite a bit of distress at work. And so that's what we did. We made, oh, here's some slides about what I did is I stepped back, I looked at the whole case, and then once I'm doing that, for me, the easiest model to work with is Beck's cognitive model. So I'm looking at what are the events, in this case, the cancer diagnosis activated this fear of being vulnerable, making mistakes, and getting humiliated, and was driving all of these symptoms. So I'm using Beck's model. I'm kind of taking Beck's model and expanding it so it accounts not just for a single disorder, but for all of the problems on the patient's problem list. And here's Beck's model, which says that activating events activate schemas to cause symptoms. And symptoms and problems are made up of behaviors, automatic thoughts, and emotions, which are all like mutually causal. And the treatment targets, I mean, one of the advantages of a conceptualization, one of the main roles of the conceptualization is it tells you what are the treatment targets. And here's a nomothetic or general conceptualization using Beck's model. And what it tells you is in Beck's theory, the treatment targets are the behaviors, the automatic thoughts, and the schemas. So this is my new model, and my treatment targets are this patient's behaviors, automatic thoughts, and schemas, especially these fears of humiliation, making mistakes, So let's see. So I know the feedback told me I needed a no now. So now I have a new formulation and a new intervention plan. I'm going to collect data to see how that one is going to work out for me. So here's an exposure hierarchy. I worked with my patient to make a hierarchy of the fear items on his fear of public speaking. So you can see I asked him, what is the top fear item on your hierarchy? And he tells me it's the annual sales meeting where there's 350 executives. And so I asked him, okay, so now tell me on a scale of 0 to 100, how scary is that event for you? He tells me 150. So it's terrifying. Um, and so then what I did is I started working with him. We started at the bottom and started practicing uh, doing these exposures. We started with the easier ones. I tried to talk him into the idea of making mistakes on purpose. He was pretty much unwilling to do that, but he was willing to do these exposures. And so we worked on these exposures, and you could see I rereaded these exposures repeatedly over time, including when I did a long-term follow-up. And you could see this treatment was carried out, like 35 years ago. Here's a plot. Here's the session number. Here's the ratings on the exposures. And you can see over time, his fears of public speaking are improving. He's able to give these talks and he gives me these fear ratings. His fear is lower and he is now making more talks than he did before. And then what's really interesting is while I was doing this work on the public speaking, every week I would still ask him to give me the same data point. Tell me, how many bouts of hypochondriacal fear did you have last week? And here's this blue line in the middle is the point where we made a change in the treatment plan and we started focusing on the fear of humiliation. And I'm hoping you can see that. We treated the fear of public speaking and we treated the hypochondriasis when we identified a major maintaining mechanism that was driving the whole system, which was the fear of humiliation. So here's my case. I was just thinking about, I have a patient I'm taking care of right now who's not doing so well. I hope I can rescue that one too. I'm thinking I had an initial poor outcome. We collected some more assessment data. We got a new diagnosis and formulation. We identified some new treatment targets and interventions, and we monitored outcome the whole way. And we got the job done. It took us kind of a long time, but hey, we got it done. So that is the model I'm using, and that is my case. So the question, I mean, I have for you is, and I'm hoping one of the moderators, you can read me from the chat. Think about your own work, and of course, you all are working with children and adolescents. If there's anything you learned from this case, can you tell me what might it be? Screen sharing is paused. Oh, okay. So now I've learned I have to stop the share. Then I have to, Brad is nodding because we learned this before, right? Now
You're
what do I
doing
do?
great.
Now I share again, and now I open my document, and now we can see it. How's that? Does that work?
We see your Word document perfectly.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So now to give Dr. Persons maybe a minute of
Absolutely.
reprieve.
Take a moment and think about, because my goal is to teach something that is useful to you. And so the question is there anything, if you just think about my experience treating this patient, and I mean, don't feel like you have to figure out what I want you to learn. There's a lot of things I find people learn that I wasn't even intending to teach, but anything that is useful to you from my telling you this experience.
All right, Dr. Person. So we have a lot of chats coming in now. So some things that were learned. Case conceptualization is ever evolving and needs to be adapted to the here and now situation.
Wow, I didn't even have that on my list. Case conceptualization is ever evolving. Right. Actually, I did have it on my list. It's in my title, right? The case conceptualization is a hypothesis. So you want to be flexible and willing to adapt your, thank you. That's a great point. What else do we have?
Facing one's fears instead of avoiding them. For example, asking him to make mistakes on purpose.
Yes, facing fears versus avoiding them. Avoiding is a great, yeah, I got it from this book about treating social anxiety. They have a great list. It's called Intentional Mistake Practice List. And his fear, you can see from his thought record, he was afraid that making mistakes would lead to catastrophic outcomes. Facing fears versus avoiding is a great versus, I mean, this is typical exposure treatment for anxiety and irrational fears, like if I make a mistake, I will get fired. Beautiful. Okay. Other ideas? Please call me Jackie if you're comfortable doing that.
Thank you, Jackie. So another attendee wrote, ongoing monitoring of client progress is critical.
Thank you. Thank you. Ongoing is critical to what? Maybe I would say critical to ongoing monitoring of client progress. I think it's critical to many things, but you can see that you could see how it helped me turn around this failing case. I'm very passionate about progress monitoring, and I'm sure you all are too. Ongoing monitoring of client progress is critical to, I don't know, it's critical to overcoming treatment failure. Because notice how the monitoring helped me see that now I had a treatment plan that it was actually getting the job done. And the way I think about it also is, and I'm sure your clinicians are all committed to doing evidence-based practice. To me, I mean, you all can tell me if you disagree, but I don't think you're doing evidence-based practice unless you're collecting evidence from the patient you are treating, every single one of them, right? Ongoing monitoring is critical ingredient of evidence-based practice. And I know you all are committed to that. Okay, great. Tristan, what else do we have?
Someone else wrote, I work with adults, but opening up the lens of diagnostic focus is useful.
Yes, I think there's a lot of interest these days, and I'm very interested into transdiagnostic work, but I think there's also less interest in diagnosis than before, but I think diagnosis is important. Diagnosis can be quite helpful. So I just want to highlight the importance of diagnosis. I would say the area in my own practice where diagnosis is especially important is in the distinction between unipolar depression and bipolar depression. You know, patient in my office is clinically depressed. I need to sort out whether this patient might have a bipolar illness because there's huge treatment implications to that distinction. So thank you for that comment. Diagnosis can be helpful. Okay, other observations?
The importance of progress monitoring so that we can see if our case conceptualization and formulation needs to be revised to better target symptoms.
Wow, very smart. Thank you. Progress monitoring, yeah, helps evaluate the, I can't quite decide if I should put accuracy, maybe I'll put accuracy of usefulness of the conceptualization. I mean, I think treatment can fail for other reasons. You know, like you might have a great conceptualization, but the patient isn't following the treatment plan, so the patient doesn't get better. So the fact that the treatment fails doesn't mean always that your conceptualization is wrong, but it can provide some data to inform your thinking about your conceptualizations, and then certainly that's one of my teaching points here today. So thank you for that. Okay. Other thoughts?
I appreciate the addition of schemas as part of the language for identifying the treatment targets.
Yes, schemas in Beck's model are a treatment target. Together with the automatic thoughts and the behaviors. And one of the key ways the formulation helps is your model and your formulation help you identify the treatment targets. I probably said that already, and in fact, whoever wrote that said that, so thank you. Okay, other observations?
To emphasize what is going on in the person's current life rather than what has led up to their difficulties.
Yeah, a cognitive behavioral conceptualization does focus primarily on the present. There is a role for thinking about the learning history, as we might call it, and Beck talks about this in particular, but yes, we focus on the present. Thank you. Okay, other observations, learning.
Importance of listening and asking questions to find the deeper issue.
Yes, or importance of listening, assessment, questions to find the missing issue or the missing piece. And to me, implicit in this also is the therapist's willingness to accept that the treatment has failed is, I think, an important step to being able to fix it. You can't fix it if you don't say, you know what, we are not getting the job. So I think therapist humility and willingness to admit failure is important. I know you didn't say that, but therapist willingness, I think that actually is part of the importance of listening to find the missing piece. Okay, let me take one or two more and then failure. Okay?
Okay. There are underlying causal mechanisms that might be impacting our understanding of presenting symptoms.
Right. There might be underlying causal mechanisms that cause and maintain the presenting symptoms. I guess that's the formulation model says there are underlying causal mechanisms, there are underlying psychological mechanisms, and I'll say this a bit more about this in a moment with my didactics. Okay, maybe I'll take one more and then I'm going to look at my list and see if there's anything missing.
Okay. So one more, reassessing underlying or driving schemas if poor progress in treatment.
Okay. Right. If poor progress, reassess the underlying schemas. Okay. Let's see. This is a great list. And let me look at my list and see if here's one of the key points that I'm going to talk about again in my didactics in a moment, which is this happens to me even to this day, even though I try to learn from this case. the patient comes in with a presenting problem the patient wants help with, I will tell you one of the things I learned from this case is don't just focus on that problem. Look at the whole picture and make sure you understand it. I feel like I learned something about this too from Marsha Linehan, you know, because she talks about how, because sometimes patients have problems, they don't see them as a problem, or they don't want to talk about them. Sometimes substance abuse is a typical example of this kind of thing. But I will tell you, I have been burnt more than once when I make the mistake of just focusing on the one thing the patient wants to look at and not looking at the whole picture. So to me, this is one of the things I'm hoping. Be sure to conduct a comprehensive assessment, not just focus on the one thing the patient wants help with. Now, maybe the patient won't accept your treatment plan, but I think you can get a better conceptualization. And the fact that I didn't do that with this case is a major reason why I failed. So that's one of my main things I was trying to get across. I think all the other things. Oh, the other thing I'm thinking about, like, I feel embarrassed that it took me like 36 sessions before I'm reworking the treatment plan. I mean, I actually will admit that I'm still trying to get, if I was doing a quarterly progress assessment in a formal way, would have helped me pick up earlier on the failure, because this failure lasted far too long in my personal opinion. It's not up to my standards. So those are my main take-home points. So thank you all. Let's see, I'm going to save this document. I'll send it to you if you want. So now what do I need to do, Brad? I'm going to stop this share.
Stop sharing.
Now I'm going to go get my slides, and then I'm going to start share. Oh, now I'm going to share screen again.
Share screen the
And
PowerPoint.
then I'm going to go get the PowerPoint. Yes.
Yeah, share screen the PowerPoint application. Thank you.
Yeah, that works better.
Great.
Okay, now I'm going to start from the current slide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Fantastic. Oh, here's my list. Also, my final item is a thought record is a great assessment tool. Did you see how much I learned from just that one thought record? Oh, I have to tell you about this. So this is a link to an interview with Annie Duke. This is one of my favorite things in the world. And here's a book that she wrote. So Annie Duke is a cognitive psychologist. And the thing that's so fantastic about, and she gives this talk, the first 20 minutes of it are completely fantastic. And she talks about how when she graduated from graduate school, she went to graduate school in cognitive psychology. She was just about to go on the job market. And she got sick and she couldn't go on the market, so she had to wait. And so then in the meantime, she had to pay her bills. So what she decided she was going to do was to follow in her brother's footsteps. And her brother was a professional poker player. So she became a professional poker player. And she describes how she went to the poker tournaments. And she said all the players there were men. All of them were 30 years older than she was. And she just watched what was going on there. She said, I watched them make the same mistakes over and over. Why? Her hypothesis about it was the culture was if you lost the hand, what you did was you went to your buddies and you told them a bad beat story. A bad beat story is when you say, oh, I was playing great, I had a good hand, and I got an unlucky card and I lost. I guess we'd call that external attributions for failure. And so then she herself went to one of her brother's friends, this elite poker player, and she started telling him her bad beat story. And he said to her, why are you telling me this story? You're wasting my time. if you would like to talk with me about what you could learn from the fact that you lost that hand and what you could do differently to be more successful, I will talk to you about that any time. Anyway, so she talks about learning from failure and mistakes. And to me, it's just totally gripping because I feel like I make a lot of mistakes and I have a certain amount of failure. We all do. And my goal is, okay, this is not working. My goal is to learn something. And if I learn something, I'll get better. So I think being able to take in the failure, acknowledge the failure without completely collapsing internally and learn from it. And she talks about that whole process, which I think is part of being a good clinician. So if you want to read Annie Duke or listen to her podcast, this would be my suggestion. So it's again the idea of learning from failure. I mean, we don't like to fail, but at least we can learn from it. There's a lot of learning from mistakes and failure. So let me just briefly talk about my model again. Here's my overview of the slides. And let me say, here I'm acknowledging Bruce Torpeda, who's, I think, especially strong in the progress monitoring arena, but all these are my colleagues and teachers, because I don't feel as though I'm presenting anything terribly new, but all these people I learned from, and I'm hoping you might see some of their ideas here. So here's the model I try to follow, and what I did is I just tried to list the 6 key steps. Number 1 is start with assessment to obtain diagnoses. I think diagnoses are important, and to begin to develop a formulation of the case. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that, and then I'm going to talk about these other steps. So first of all, we're trying to develop a conceptualization. So I wanted to give you a definition of a conceptualization, which is, first of all, it's a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis about the predisposing, which is the long-term causal. The precipitating, that's like the events, like my patient's cancer diagnosis, and the perpetuating factors, the factors that perpetuate the symptoms and problems. So here's the problems. In my picture, I was putting the perpetuating factors here. And the main element of the formulation that guides the treatment and is the main target of treatment is the perpetuating factors, because those are the factors that perpetuate the symptoms. So in my patient's case, it was these beliefs. If I make a mistake, I'll lose my job. If I make a mistake, I'll be humiliated. If I'm not perfect, I'll be humiliated. Those were his perpetuating factors, and those were my main targets of treatment. So what do I mean by a problem? I mean, you can see these are the problems in the formulation. What I mean by a problem is it's a symptom, a disorder, so it could be a diagnosis, or a difficulty. And I like to think of symptoms and problems as observable. Like underlying things like schemas, I put them in my predisposing factors. And problems are like behaviors, like drinking too much, avoiding giving talks, feeling anxious. Oh, here's some good examples. Suicidal behavior, depressed mood, excuse me, OCD, arguing all the time with your spouse. That's what I mean by problems. So you want to know, so your formulation is you're going to account for all the problems. Sometimes you can't account for all of the problems, but you want to make sure there's no big ticket ones that you're missing. So I'm trying to do an initial assessment. I'm trying to pay attention to all of these factors. I'm not necessarily assessing every single one of these in detail, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anything important. In the case, I'm also not treating all of these problems. So like, for example, one of my cases that has been really hard for me is a depressed patient who's also got an older man. He also has diabetes, and perhaps because he's depressed, but anyway, he's poor at maintaining the treatment regimen for his diabetes. So I'm not treating the diabetes per se, but I'm treating the poor health behaviors related to the diabetes, which that's like a healthcare difficulty. So you want to have the whole picture, and these are the domains that we want to assess. I'm suggesting this would be my model. And then here's what I mean by a perpetuating factor. It's a psychological factor. There certainly are biological factors that play a role. We're usually intervening and paying attention to the psychological factors that maintain the problems. So typical perpetuating factors in cognitive behavior therapy: automatic thoughts, maladaptive behaviors, avoidance, problematic contingencies, perfectionism. These are common maintaining factors. Oh, I see I have them on this slide also. So these are typical treatment targets and maintaining factors that fall into our diagnoses. I guess if we're treating children and adolescents, some of these are going to be there, and maybe you have some others as well. I will give you all a handout of this. This is a primitive little picture that I use sometimes with my patients or in consultation to draft out a formulation where the round bubbles are the problems, and then in that box down below you can write the maintaining mechanisms, the perpetuating factors, whatever term you want to use. I'm using those two terms interchangeably. So what I've been talking about so far is assessment to obtain diagnoses and begin to develop a formulation. Another piece of the model, which I'm not going to talk about in detail and which I didn't present in my case, is identifying the patient's treatment goals. Number 3, you want to be using cognitive behavioral interventions to target the perpetuating factors that are identified in the formulation. You want to monitor progress, and you want to use the progress monitoring data to evaluate the success of the treatment. Like, are we accomplishing the patient's treatment goals? And we can also use it to help us evaluate the quality of the formulation, as one of you all pointed out. Thank you. And if the progress is poor, there's a lot of steps you can take, but certainly one of them is revising the formulation and the intervention plan. Other steps you could take include evaluating, is the patient complying with the treatment plan? Sometimes we all make up beautiful treatment plans. Patients agree to the treatment plan. Patient doesn't follow the treatment plan. And if we don't know that that's happening, then we're going to not have the data we know we need to evaluate. Is it a good treatment plan? Another complication we all have, and I think frequently happens with child and adolescent cases, is there's many people who are part of the whole treatment team, so to speak, often the teachers, the parents, the therapist, the child. And so looking to see, is everybody on the same page? Are there some people who are part of this whole network, or whatever word you would use to describe everybody in the child's world? Some of them might be on board the treatment plan and others might not be. So that's another factor to consider if progress is poor, especially with your child cases. Okay, so let me say what I have done here today is to talk about my patient, and I described how I started with an initial formulation and treatment plan. I got a poor outcome. I reworked the diagnosis, the formulation, and the treatment plan. I got a new intervention and a better outcome. So a process for handling failure and for using the hypothesis, using the formulation for hypothesis testing, collecting progress monitoring data. And then what I did is briefly give you 6 slides to summarize the case formulation approach. Okay, so then I'm going to ask you all for your take-home messages, and in a moment I'm going to ask you for action items, and then I'm going to take questions. Maybe if you all want to submit take-home messages, any additional take-home messages that we didn't hear from before, maybe I'll just listen to one or two take-home messages, and then I'll move to questions if that timing works for everybody.
Yeah, so anyone in the room encouraged to use the chat again for take-home messages not covered. Oh, sorry, Jackie, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I'm interrupting you. I just wanted to highlight what you're saying. Thank you. I would love to hear from you all as to what did I say that was useful to you? Anything additional that I didn't already hear?
Okay. So someone from the audience said, identify the perpetuating factors and use them for targeting intervention. These are usually current situations as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
That's kind of what I'm thinking about too, is oftentimes we have so many people involved with the kids, you know, there's probation, child welfare, like a number of different entities. And I think people kind of get stuck on what the kid was doing before, and hard to see where things are going or how things have changed, and using that data can be really helpful.
That sounds really smart to help everybody stay on track and get a sense of where the case is. Is it moving forward in a good way or not?
Yeah, if you look at a graph and you can see, oh, actually they're making progress, that can be really helpful.
So now that thing that you're saying there, Jamie, is really important. And I'm surprised I didn't put it on my list of take-home messages, because but maybe you all are doing this already, but you can't just collect progress monitoring data. You must have a plot. You must have a visual representation of the data. And ideally, well, at least for me, for my adult cases, it's a plot that I can look at and the patient, we can both look at it. So I know I was in a practice once where one of my colleagues, she'd collect the data. She had a whole file full of BDI scores in the chart. She didn't have a plot. If you do not have a plot, you can't see the up and down of the case. We would like to see the down in the case of the Beck depression inventory. But yeah, you got to have a plot. Okay, any final take-home message, Tristan, that I should hear? Or we got them, do you think?
There are several more coming in. How many would you like? I can maybe try to summarize some of them.
Tell me two more.
Okay. So there are a couple of people who kind of responded with the theme of, thank you for sharing your failures and admitting when you're wrong. It helps to empower our clients. Thank you for modeling humility and sharing your experience.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the highlight, because I think it makes us all good clinicians if we can acknowledge failures. And I would tell you, my patients really appreciate it. You know, okay, could we agree we're not getting the job done? And let's talk about what can we do differently to get a better result for you. And it's very hard, but so thank you for that. Okay, suppose I ask you for take-home action items. Anything that you're going to do in your practice next week, like something on your to-do list. Anything at all?
I literally just put on my to-do list, plot the data for such.
Plot the data. Thank you. If you tell me that, I am a very happy camper. Oh, another take-home message I was hoping to highlight earlier was, notice that in my case that I presented to you, I collected progress monitoring data by asking for a simple verbal report from the patient. So don't get overwhelmed that you need to have a whole big complex online tool. There's a lot of online tools. I think Bruce Torpeda has developed some, and they're excellent, and it's great to use them. But it's sometimes hard to get started using these tools. So simple is fine, you know, my patient, I asked him for a simple verbal report at the beginning of every session, and then I made a plot. Done and done. So simple is good. Okay, that's a great take-home message action item. Any other action items? And then we can move to questions here for you all.
Dr. Persons, my action item that I'm going to take away, I think, is to try to not lose the forest for the trees and kind of broaden out the focus back out to look at the whole person and the whole picture, so that I can have those opportunities to kind of reassess the formulation and incorporate kind of all the data, so that we're not just focusing in on kind of one maybe minute aspect of what's going wrong.
Ah, thank you. Yeah, I developed these formulation ideas because I was very fortunate to be trained by Dr. Beck and Dr. Burns at Penn to treat depression. So then I moved to California. I'm here in California. I'm starting my private practice. All these depressed patients are coming in my office. I know how to treat depression. But then I realized, wait a minute, these patients have a whole lot of other problems too. You know, they have social anxiety disorder. They have a substance use problem. They can't keep a job. If I'm not paying attention to those problems, I'm not going to be able to help this patient. So I need to look at the whole patient, not just a single disorder. Thank you, Kurt. Okay. So I appreciate all the input you all are giving me, and I'm happy to take questions if that would be helpful.
I think that would be extremely helpful. Yes, so open for questions from anyone in the audience. You just kind of can put them up in the chat.
So there was one question that came up after the case presentation that was, what caused his symptoms spike late in therapy?
Oh, you know, that's a great question. And I wish I knew the answer. I don't remember. Because I treated this patient so long ago, but I have a progress monitoring tool I'm using right now. So when there's a big spike like this, I can put a note. And of course, when I was doing paper and pencil, I could put a note. But you want to know the answer to that question, because if there's a big symptom spike, you want to know what's causing it, because it'll help you flesh out your formulation. You know, like maybe somebody close to him was laid off at work or something. Do you know what I mean? So if you pay attention to those spikes in the progress monitoring plot, it can help you inform your formulation. So your question is excellent, and I do not know the answer.
Okay. So Keegan
Okay.
asks, oh.
Why don't you go ahead, Tristan, because I can only see part of it.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Do you have a good recommendation for resources to teach graduate students, doctoral graduate students, about conceptualization?
I'm going to send you a reading list with your handouts. I have my book. I'm thinking about updating my book and reworking it. Here's my book. It's for treating adults. I'm sure there are some. Is there a book for treating kids? Well, there's, I'd be reading Torpeda and Weiss, their modular approach. And I'll send you a reading list with some other suggestions. Bob Friedberg's word. Yes, I agree. He's here in the Bay Area, I believe.
As more questions are coming in, Jackie, if it's okay, selfishly, I have a question.
Please.
To take up a little bit of as questions come in. So
of course, Brent.
And so the point about the you stressing the visual graph, right? So we had the bouts of hypochondriacal fear over time,
Yep, yep.
and you stressing the importance of visual display of data. And one of the things I really liked, among many things, was talking about the quick and dirty sort of verbal report. Just like, how many bouts of fear did you have last week? And kind of I guess, in public mental health settings, it's always something that we struggle with, this sort of dialectic between this quick and dirty, maybe more idiographic kind
Yep,
of
yep.
way of doing it, against some like multi-item, very long, gold standard, reliable and valid um, approach. So I was just wondering if you might share, I guess, maybe thought processes or guideposts that you have for kind of balancing the two, kind of like, here are things that I consider when and where to implement more quick and dirty, repeated measure kinds versus heavy hitter, gold standard, heavy, reliably and valid kind of approaches. You have any kind of thoughts
Yeah,
about how you balance those two?
yeah, your question is very good. I would say the first consideration is you want a choice that's doable for the clinician. So depending on the setting where the clinician is working or the stage of the clinician's career, like, pick a method that's going to work for you. It doesn't have to be perfect, but uh, sometimes also pick a method that's going to work for your patient. Like, I have a tool that I use with a lot of my patients right now. It's called Psych Surveys. And they have a library of the PHQ-9 and these standard measures. I like to use them. I noticed that with one of my guys, I'm not using it. We developed a list of idiographic things he's working on. And he rates those every week because the standard measures were not picking up symptoms very much. And so I'm using the diary card, and he's got a list of things like downtime at the end of the day. He has a list of things that he's trying to do more of for the most part. Downtime at the end of the day, mindfulness, meditation, low expectations for others, low expectations for self, supportive and encouraging of self. I'm trying to counter that. So that works better for him. We tried the other, and I just wasn't getting useful data. And don't be afraid to change. Try one thing. If it's not working, try something else and collaborate with your patient to find something that seems useful to both of you. And if the patient sees that you're using the data, then the patient will do the measure. And in this case, my patient, the data collection is not just monitoring the treatment. It's like an intervention of the treatment. Do you know what I mean? So progress monitoring is hugely powerful. Those would be my short answers to your question, but it's a very interesting question because it is hard sometimes to make a choice. But just pick something and try it. If it doesn't work, try something else.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions and or thoughts from the panelists or Candy leadership here.
I think for us, often the reason that this doesn't happen is out of fear that we don't have an alternative or something better. And so we kind of go on this trajectory. Oh, they're not doing well, so let's go up in the level of service. Let's make it more restrictive care and those kinds of things. So that's kind of one of my takeaways, is thinking about what are some other options that yeah.
And it's true, sometimes the higher level of care is needed. But what you're saying is this case illustrates the idea that it might not be a higher level of care, it might be a different focus to the treatment. Like I have a case right now, a PTSD case, it's not going all that well. I don't think we need a higher level of care, but I think I need to refocus the treatment in some way, which I have not yet figured out, but my patient is really smart, so that's good. But yeah, refocus the treatment on a different target. I had a case once that didn't go all that well, and I decided that my goals needed to be changed. The patient and I, we were trying to accomplish unrealistic goals. My patient met criteria for schizoaffective disorder, and I was trying to reduce his mood scores and stuff. I think in hindsight, what I needed was more realistic treatment goals, like keep him out of the hospital, reduce the bouts of paranoid thinking. So sometimes when we're not successful with one set of goals, we might be having unrealistic goals for the treatment too. So I wrote up with my colleagues once, we made a document, it's called the Lack of Progress Worksheet. It has about like 10 different hypotheses for why you might be making progress, and then it has action items for all of them. One of them might be the unrealistic treatment goals is another thing to think about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tristan, you see Kelsey's question in the
Yes.
chat?
So Kelsey's asking, what recommendations do you have for getting patients and therapists motivated to do measures that are required by their organization, where there might be not be as much individual choice or collaborative decision making?
So here we've got an organization that's requiring measures that then now you've got the task is to get the patients motivated and the clinicians motivated. See, this is challenging. That's like a whole system.
And I would add that this is also for our system. There are the other agencies involved too. So it's not just getting our agency and our providers, but all the other folks that are involved to agree to do these things. So it's really challenging with kids, especially the kids that we work with at CAMD.
It's challenging to get them to do the measures.
Yeah, and to agree that the measures are useful or that they're, reflecting what's really going on for the kid. And so that can be hard.
So are they decent measures? I mean, do the clinicians find them helpful? Yes or no? Sometimes you're saying sometimes yes and sometimes no.
Yeah, I think that that's part of the question is sometimes we're requiring these measures and assessments, and sometimes we're not thinking about other measures that might be really helpful to track.
Right. Well, the thing that motivates patients to do the measures is if the clinician is using the measure to guide the treatment. Like if your patient comes in the door and you have a plot and they did the measure and you're looking at the plot of the measure with them and they see that you're using the data, that motivates them to provide the data. The other motivator you can use is you could just not start the session until you have the data. Which imagine you're going to see a cardiologist to treat your blood pressure. The cardiologist could reasonably say to you, I need the data about the blood pressure in order to figure out what to do with your treatment. So could we collect the data now? So, so that the clinicians can if they can use the data in the treatment, that'll motivate the patients. And if the clinician basically doesn't start the session until the data are there, that'll motivate the patients. But part of the challenge is what? To motivate the clinicians. Well, to me, what motivates me to collect the data is the data are useful to me. So then maybe some training or help to help the clinicians be able to use the data. Because I have been using data for so long, I can't do the treatment if I don't have the data, because the data are useful to me. But I'm fortunate, if the data I'm collecting aren't useful, I can collect some other data. Can you give clinicians flexibility or not really?
I mean, I think we can, and I think, we have, for CAMD, we have these measures that we collect every 3 months. One is every 3 months and one's every month. But that doesn't mean they can't collect other things.
Right. Because data that are collected every month or every 3 months aren't all that useful to the clinician. I mean, I wouldn't find them all that useful. What I need is data from you, my patient, about your last week. That's
Right.
what I need.
Right.
Every session.
Yeah.
And if I get those, yeah.
And so those are things that they can be collecting. The clinicians can be collecting in addition to these other ones that are sort of like requirements. So I think that that's the big thing, is helping them to understand there's other things that they can be doing weekly.
And is there any way of feeding back to the clinicians the results of the monthly or every 3 months data collection, so the clinician learns something from them? Or maybe some training to help the clinician understand. Do they have the potential to be useful to the clinician, or are they really for the administrator?
I think it's both. I think it can be both. Yeah. But I like what Flo said. And each session progress meetings. Yeah, exactly. You should be doing those things.
Yeah. So then maybe you can kind of build a culture of progress monitoring.
That's why we have you here today. This is one of the starts of that. We're working.
Okay, well, I am happy to hear it, because I am just there. I can tell you, I gave a talk for the ABCT webinar on the topic of measurement-based care. If that would be helpful to you, you can probably get it. And I've been reading the literature on measurement-based care. One of the reasons to collect progress monitoring is, if you do, your patients will have better outcomes, period. Doesn't matter what kind of therapy you're doing. If you collect data every session and use the data to guide your treatment, your patients will have better outcomes. It's an evidence-based intervention. And to me, psychotherapy is so complicated and difficult. If you tell me a simple thing like this that I can do that'll get me better outcomes, to me, that's low-hanging fruit, and I will do it. So there's a literature on the relationship between progress monitoring data and outcome that maybe that would help sell your clinicians.
Thank you very much. So if it's okay, Jackie, we'll just end with two more, and then I'll talk about it with housekeeping.
Of course.
Thank you very much. Tristan, could you walk us through the last two, one at a time?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one's a two-part question. So how do you use measurement to help support reinforcing the treatment on a different target? And then how do you incorporate measurement in navigating that discussion with your client and with a different treatment team?
So the first question is, how do I use measurement to help shift the treatment to a different target, for example?
Support reinforcing, yep.
Support refocusing.
Yeah. Well, I assume part of what you're doing is you're monitoring that different target. So, I mean, it is true, my guy, every week he would give me the health anxiety rating, but I was also monitoring, the anxiety ratings for the public speaking exposures we were doing. So I'm going to monitor the new target also, and that's going to help the patient shift. Am I understanding the question?
I think so. Yeah, it's hard without the verbal interaction from we're looking at the Q&A part of the bottom of the Zoom app. how do you use measurement to help support refocusing treatment on a different target? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I assume part of the new treatment on the new target is going to involve different homework assignments. So that's not the same as monitoring progress, but my patients, especially the ones who meet with me in my office, they don't walk out the door without a piece of paper that tells them what their homework assignments are. And the homework assignments are very tied to the treatment targets. So it might be clearly identifying homework assignments tied to the new targets and monitoring compliance with the homework is part of making that happen.
Thank you, Jackie. So Tristan, maybe you can close us out with this last question from Tony.
Yeah, so Tony's asking, I'm curious what changes you're thinking are necessary to incorporate in a revised edition of your book.
Oh my goodness. I want my next book to be a little more user-friendly. My first one was kind of a little bit academic and cerebral. I want to give people a lot of actual help building formulations, so I want to provide some templates. My 2008 book is very tied to empirically supported treatments, so I want to shift away from that. And I want to pay much more attention to transdiagnostic maintaining mechanisms. Like if I was going to treat this patient now, I might be targeting intolerance of uncertainty. I might be targeting perfectionism. You know, these mechanisms are getting a lot more attention in the literature now than they were then. So those are some of my revisions. Thank you for that question.
Great, thank you very much. So just kind of bringing us out to a close, just a housekeeping thing, then we'll end more formally. So the housekeeping is for participants, whichever email you use to register for today's roundtable, please be on the lookout for a feedback survey that we'll be sending to that specific email address. If you have signed up to receive social work CEUs, the CEUs will be awarded based on both your time in the webinar as well as completing the forthcoming survey. And in addition, a special thank you again to HPA for co-sponsoring this roundtable and offering free CEUs for its HPA members. And then in closing, Jackie, just wanted to, I think I'm speak on behalf of everyone, express our deepest note of gratitude and appreciation for you taking time out of your day, sharing your expertise, and giving us some inspiration and a lot of things to think about. So thank you very much.
Completely my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And if the feedback is something I could look at, that's always helpful to me to take in feedback and improve for the future. So thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be able to present to your group. What you're doing is so important and so impressive.
Oh, thank you very much. And we'll absolutely circle back with the feedback. Surveys will be going out with other resources. So thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Tristan, I think you can stop the recording and then, yeah.